Let's talk about toning paper by hand. And it's important to recognize that toning paper by hand is a unique thing for the artist. There's an inviting character to the paper. If I compare what I have here, which is a machine-toned, factory-set color value, as we sometimes refer to it, it doesn't feel very inviting to me. It feels somewhat clinical. It's convenient and it's good in certain ways, but when you really want to raise your game to another level, you gotta tone by hand. I'm making this video in acknowledgement of the students who are preparing for my upcoming online workshop on the work of Nikolai Fechin, and we are studying how to make something happen with our paper tone itself. For previous workshops, we've worked on this particular tonality or a tone like it, as in a neutral gray, and you are certainly invited to do the same thing in the workshop this time around. It's perfectly suitable to working in an online master copy situation, and yet I thought we could have some more fun this time around by trying out a different way. For the purpose of making an effective tone to draw upon, I want you to get a tube of watercolor. I'm going to use some ivory black watercolor. Professional grade, some ivory black Winsor Newton watercolor. Always important to use professional grade products. You're also going to need a 2-inch house painter's brush. These so-called cheap brushes, but they're the good ones. I have a few of these in my Amazon account. I've made a list for my students, and you can go to that list in the description part of this video, so it's easily accessible for you. You're also going to need some water and some kind of a cheap dish or tray for making your tonality. In addition to those items, I highly recommend that you acquire a scrap piece of paper in order to test your tone before you apply it, because you're going to want to know what it is you're dealing with. These are very specific decisions about the exact nature of the tone, what you're going to be working on, its value, its composition, its texture, because it will dry differently even than you imagine. I'm going to be using a sheet of Gutenberg laid paper. It's a 31 by 41 inch sheet. It's a fairly thick textured paper. If I rake the light on it, you might be able to see that there are various characteristics, hairs, little bits and pieces of fiber that you can see are somewhat similar to the Fechin, which makes me think that this might be a good option to pursue something that can really be instructive for us related to copying Fechin. And this, I should also note, is a cream colored or warm toned as it's manufactured. We're going to take this and tear it down to a smaller sheet. In order to get ourselves there, we're going to fold it and just crease it, and make sure you pull with the fingernail. Go ahead and tear it like this. I'm going to use a scale that's approximately 40 centimeters by about 26.5 centimeters, or smaller, but that's a good size to do a drawing of this scale, as you can see. It's also important that you do the feel test as an artist, so you decide which is the more ideal side for working on top of. And I think that the back of this is something I can really tell the difference on, because it doesn't feel like it's going to catch or capture the particles the way we want them to go into the paper. They should embed into the page. And so it is without a doubt that I've got the proper side to work upon, which you always want to be mindful of before you set up to tone. I position my paper now on, in fact, a foam core board, because you just want to use a regular throwaway board. And I'm going to begin taping down the page from the center, much like how you would stretch a canvas first. Center, center, like that. And then you have to go in and use a little bit more tape than you would prefer, just to ensure that this entire piece of paper is taped down. Now, I always like the warm quality of this paper, because if I am working on it, it gives me a warm highlight if I erase through the tone. And I will talk more about that this summer as we introduce a new theme to the drawing tutorials. I'm going to be talking to you about color drawing, which is really something special, and we'll get into that together. You can see now it's attached. And the next step is going to be to make a tone. I don't have very much to tone in this particular example. I just want to get it right, as we all do. So we should expect that it may take a few sheets in order to make this perfect. There's a benefit in what I'm saying because the original piece, just a single sheet of this stuff, is 31 by 41 inches. It's quite large. Therefore, if you cut it down and make it into smaller pieces for toning purposes, you're going to have probably 8 of this to go around. And so again, you only need a single sheet. The next thing that I'm going to do is squeeze just a little bit of ivory black out onto my brush, like this. And I'm going to get it on the bristles because it'll give me a good sense of how much to put down. I put that aside for a second. Then I take my throwaway cup like this one, and I add a small amount of water, just a little bit, doesn't take much, and then I add my watercolor from my brush. I think because I don't want this to tip over, I should show you this on the side. See, it's going to add a gray for us. And now comes one of the important parts of the exercise, and that is to really grind the material because it's on the bristle brush, as you know, and we're not interested in any unwelcome surprises inside the bristles. We want to get everything emulsified, which means dissolved. All of that watercolor is going to have to go away. But that is my initial tonality. And so we have liquefied the material. We really don't know what it is without the scrap sheet of paper. So let's get out the scrap and look at that. So now I take my scrap piece of paper and I just wipe this out. And you see it gives me something, which is just a very slight difference between what I have on, let's say, the white perimeter and what's going on inside the drawing. And I'm okay with that. I don't need much to show me something unique and different that I can work into, because among other things you'll see that it incorporates some of the fibers that we were getting at, and there's a very slight loose brushy quality to the way this textures out, and I like that, so I'm going to go for that in the overall piece. To make sure that I collect as much of that pigment on the brush as I can possibly get, and that means brushing it in. I also don't want to get it too wet. It's got to be just dry enough that it won't just run off the paper. So let's try this. I'm going to start at the top, and I'm just going to run this mixture down the paper. Just being aware of how subtle it is and how valuable it might be to keep something somewhat consistent like this as the undertone, the handmade undertone of what I aspire to work on in the near future. If you decide that this isn't a good surface, you could obviously add a certain temperature to it by means of other watercolor pigments. But I would advise you to prioritize the value, the tonal value, before you go any further into the intrigue of doing something that has some exotic coloration in it. And so what's going to happen, because the sheet is taped to a foam core board, it's going to buckle initially, but then once it sets up to dry, it's going to dry up completely flat. I encourage you to make a few sheets like this to get you prepared for the workshop. It's been a few minutes since we toned the paper with watercolor, and you can see that the paper itself is now just about totally flat and how we would want it in a drawing situation. If you're toning your paper on a board and you place it flat on a table like this, it's not going to dry that way. It's going to dry like a tie-dye t-shirt. It's going to dry with an uneven pattern all across it because the pigments will have distributed within the valleys of the paper, the buckled page, and the peaks of those buckles will not have much pigment, and so it will look all uneven. I also ask that you take a look at the detail on this paper and notice that it has very slight shifts in surface color, and that's the mark of a hand-toned paper. It's going to have that organic feel. Can you see that? Can you also see the fibers in there? The paper fibers. I think that that's just about where we want it, but I wanted to offer you one more thing to think about in terms of preparation for the endeavor that we're going to enjoy together in the next few days. And that final recommendation is this. Given the mandate of charcoal and crayon that we're going to be looking into regarding Fechin's technique, that it might not be a bad idea to hit this with a dry tone as well as having treated it already with a wet tone. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to take this substance. It's called charcoal powder. Make sure when you pick it up, it's charcoal powder and not graphite powder. And I'm going to apply a very thin wash of charcoal powder to the paper in order to prepare it for what we're going to engage and endeavor to create upon it. Because charcoal powder is going to work to our advantage with this specific medium. We'll take the lid off this stuff first, and you don't just want to pour it out onto a table. Then it'll get airborne, it'll get dangerous. I don't want you to be in any kind of health risk. And so what you do is you grab a paper towel and you just dab it into the substance. I take a paper towel and just like my paper, I rip it and fold it up into a couple of smaller sheets like this or pieces. Then I dip it into the substance like that. So I just carry a little bit of it out of the package. And then I'm going to buffer that on another piece like this. So I'm going to get this on here and just distribute a little bit more of the hand-toned dry media this time onto the paper. Give it a quality that it doesn't otherwise have as much right now. Really a big fan of that look, you see, that kind of aesthetic that he has going on. And he's got a paper that I think is a lot more temperamental than what we're ideally suited to using. I'm going to use a fan. Just ever so slightly distribute a bit more charcoal and just kind of prep it with a chamois. And I'm going to do this a few times until I get something that has a lot more of a handmade quality to it. I think it'll be very interesting to work this way. And then I think prepping it with the charcoal now is going to be helpful because when we go on top of this with more charcoal, it's going to be nice. It's going to be like working into an existing tone that we're comfortable with, or our paper is in fact comfortable with. So I'm just kind of dusting this up and allowing the charcoal to collect. In a sense, just scuffing up the surface. And again, if I don't like it, then I can dig into this a little bit more, you see, and just give it a look that will provide some worked quality. And so now I've got something, you can see in the quality of the marks already, that there's a feeling in this that will be able to work into an existing tone that has some of those charcoal aspects to it. It's got the dry, friable character. And I think having a tone like this is really incredibly inviting. If you get it where it's too dark, obviously, for example, you don't want that necessarily, you can dig it out. There's an in and out or a back and forth quality, give and take, and I'm going to use a chamois to get myself there. You see that? So there's going to be an opportunity here to just settle on exactly the right tonal consistency that you're after. And I want something like that. That's what I'm looking for. So there's our tonality related to the original color value of the paper on this side. I invite you to make a couple of more sheets like that so that you've got a selection, a variety, a set of options for yourself that'll give you something to work on. And I think once we hit that tone with our charcoal sticks, you'll be able to see, if you're noticing, that there is a conspicuous difference, but it's kind of unified. I think you'll like the feel of that. I think we're all going to have a really good time working into the material. There's even a possibility, if you want, of furthering the tonal structure by going in with a few strokes of this, which might lay a nice predicate for the upcoming class or for whatever your studio work has in store for you. So there's our tone. Ideal for charcoal, amazing for compressed charcoal, for Conte, for Wolf's Carbon, for the other items we're going to take advantage of. So it's both a wet and a dry tone, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. As we study the work of Nikolai Fechin together, in both his unforgettable lyricism, but also his constructive undergirding. I look forward to our work together in the next few days on that course, and I'll see you soon.